Sorry, it's been a while without an upload. I am still alive, as you can see, and I do think about you every day, but I want to make sure the content is interesting when I post. In the meantime, I've just been live streaming most days, and I think most of you are aware that I do that, and you've already decided whether or not it's interesting to you, but I do get like a couple people who come into chat each day and go, I didn't know you streamed. So for the people in the back, I do stream most days, twitch.tv/CaptainSparklez. There's also the VODs that go up on CaptainSparklez too. Anyway, enough self-promotion for this video. Well, maybe not entirely true. Like, there's some inherent self-promotion baked into the topic here, but it's not the intent. Just more of like a happy side effect, coincidence. Anyway, I wanted to talk about what a wild ride the past few months have been in the world of trying to produce a board game, which is a physical good that's manufactured elsewhere and then brought in to the United States for a lot of those units. I'm sure some of you might be able to identify why that is, but a little bit of background. So it was about 7 months ago that we launched the Kickstarter for Fable Fury, our board game, and I posted this video announcing it, and I realized I never did like a formal post-mortem on how it went. It went very well. Like, I didn't know what to expect. And it's not like a secret. I'm not at the pinnacle of my viewership at this point, but $516,357 with 4,582 backers. I blew away my expectations. If you went and pledged, super much appreciated. I'm glad that you thought it was interesting. And I do genuinely think it is a fun game to play and that people will enjoy playing it. And we were like, all right, that was a good Kickstarter. We're home free. Let's get this thing made, because there's like still more steps to finalize before going into manufacturing. Well, you know, that's what's been going on since the Kickstarter ended. Obviously, during the Kickstarter, the work has been ongoing, Kickstarter or no Kickstarter, in play. And the goal was to have landed units ready to send out to everybody who... It's on Kickstarter now, especially for board games. Essentially, think of it as a pre-order. It's not just like, hey, help fund this and then you can buy it later. Like, it's a pre-order for the game. So we're hoping to have these units landed in the fall to send to everybody who, you know, pledged into the Kickstarter. So things happened since the Kickstarter. So the board game was set to be manufactured in China, shipped some of the units over to the US for distribution. Other units would be going to Europe, so slightly less affected in that case. But we had a tariff situation take place since then, and it escalated pretty quickly, but each step of the way, like, there's a new announcement every single week. And in the beginning, right, we get, okay, so it's going to be 10% on everything. Then that goes up by another 10%. And this baseline holds for about a month. And we're having these discussions like, okay, so we can probably eat this cost. It's not ideal, but we should be able to still make it work. Liberation Day comes around and now we're up to 54%. We're like, oh, okay, so I guess we'll probably be able to maybe eat those costs, but definitely going to have to raise costs on any units that are manufactured if people order them once it goes into retail distribution, because that's a bit of an increase in taxes that we're going to have to pay once the ship lands in the US. And then after that, because China responded and said, okay, well, if you're going to do tariffs on our goods, we're going to do tariffs on your goods. And then it just went up to full trade embargo, basically at 145%. And when it hit 145%, it was like, oh, okay, well, now not only is it like, oh, this is going to hurt, it's just not feasible. We're going to have to pay more than the cost that people pledged in the Kickstarter per unit in order to be able to receive the goods. And like that, just, it's not feasible. We can't really go forward with manufacturing and shipping out the units if we're not only not going to be able to make any profit, we're actually going to be running at a loss at that amount of tax that's due when the ship hits the port. So needless to say, not a good situation. And it's also like, we're in the worst possible situation that we can possibly be in, right? Because at least in another scenario where you're ordering units as demand comes in, it's like you can adjust on your pricing on that next order once the units come in. If you need to increase your pricing, you can do it. Sure, demand's going to fall off. But in our case, we have people who have already pledged, pre-ordered, think of it that way, for a certain amount, which was based upon what we figured our costs would be, being able to manufacture in China, ship it over, and then distribute that way. And that's how we priced everything. So the money is already in. The pre-orders are already in, but now the costs are up by not exactly 145% on the retail, but on our landed costs, again, eating into any sort of profit margin there might be. And it's like, okay, how do we, like, if we hadn't taken any orders, that would be one thing. We'd have to go back to the drawing board, adjust, decide if we still want to go forward. If we already had shipped units to customers, well, any future orders might be affected, but that's fine. We're in this awful middle ground, the worst possible place you could ever be in for this sort of scenario to arise. You're stuck in this no man's land of pre-orders are in, but now the costs have changed dramatically. And I know there's bound to be a handful of people who are going to comment on this video and say, well, you should have manufactured the board game in the US to begin with. This is what you get for manufacturing elsewhere. And I'd respond to that in a couple ways. A, if you lived in a place that had never had an earthquake, and then all of a sudden a massive 9.0 magnitude hit and all the houses collapsed, I don't know that you'd go and tell the people, hey, well, you should have known that the earthquake was coming and you should have built the houses to spec to resist them. And I would also say that if we had manufactured in the US prior to all of this, then our costs here on the Kickstarter would be completely uncompetitive to everybody else who's manufacturing a board game. And people would look at the different tiers in the Kickstarter and say, what, this is ridiculously way too expensive. I'm not going to buy that when every other board game that's out there on Kickstarter is half the cost, maybe even less than half the cost. So you have to be competitive to what the pricing is for the industry standard, and it wouldn't be feasible if from the outset we decided, okay, we're going to manufacture in the United States. So that is why the supply chains are what they are, because people are used to that sort of cost. Now, there's a world where you gradually implement the changes and you say, okay, so in a year from now, the tariffs are going to go up to 54%. So take some time, adjust your supply chain. The year after that, it's going to go a little bit higher. Or maybe the goal was 54% being the end, and then it just became a trade war embargo, yada, yada. But every year, they're going to go up by 10% in order to try to get people to change their assembly lines, their supply chains to adjust for this sort of thing. Now, there's also, you can take into account, okay, well, there could be a new administration and everything is going to get rolled back. So therefore, why would we make these changes instead of just waiting out? There are a bunch of dynamics I'm not going to get into about why company behavior might not follow even if there's a gradual rollout. But regardless, there's no time to adjust when it's just a light switch overnight. And you're like, okay, well, can't do anything about this. So we were for a little over a month, April 9th to May 12th, sitting in a very, very uncomfortable position. And I was considering making a video talking about this and going, hey guys, really unfortunate we're going to be in a holding pattern. Granted, for anyone out there who has pledged, who's wondering what the status is, we have still, while this has all been going on, very much been going full steam ahead with getting all the assets finalized, making sure everything is ready to go, hit the button on manufacturing as soon as we determine that it's feasible to do so, which, at 145% wasn't. But boy, what a sigh of relief that on May 12th, there was a little bit of a de-escalation and hey, we're going to go back down to 30%, which is the 30% is still much higher than it was going into the beginning of the year, the end of the Kickstarter, when we had already priced out what everything is going to cost for landing and distributing. But 30% while not ideal, is at least it should be feasible. The problem is, though, you just don't know. Okay, do we hit the 90 days when this pause ends and no deal is reached and we're back up to 145%? Does whatever deal that happens end up with tariffs going higher than 30%? Or do we get lucky, it goes down? Or do we have to go into manufacturing at 30%, and then all of a sudden the next week, it's down to 10%, but we've already landed, we've already paid, and that's that. We're just out tens of thousands of dollars in a tax bill that wouldn't have been due had it happened a week later. It is an impossible environment to be able to make a sound business decision because you don't know what's going to happen the next week. And it's not also, by the way, not only is it the initial 516,000, we also had late pledges and add-ons that came out since the Kickstarter was finished on BackerKit. By the way, what a wild amount of interest on the premium game board mats, sort of like a softer neoprene game mat, and then some card sleeves. Boy, when Sam and Conrad rolled these out, I was like, is this really going to get that much? Oh my God, it's getting a lot of interest from people. And also a Dracorath plushie, which is my favorite personally. By the way, Bootstrap Buckaroo, from Revenge, Fallen Kingdom, so on and so forth, he produced the 3D model that the factory used for it. We have some little tweaks that we want to do on this, because it's not an exact match to the 3D model, but anyway, there'll be a little bit more back and forth. I think he's very, very cute. But sorry, back to the whole thing at hand here. I don't know, maybe it's insights for anyone who's out there in the world of policy to see what overnight impacts in the way of implementing new and very dramatic taxes can have on people who are trying to make things, because generally gradual and pre-announced things with lead up, I would tend to think will be a little bit more effective at allowing people to be more maneuverable, because it's big ships that have to be, both literally and figuratively, that have to be adjusted when things like this take place. And so, unfortunately, the end result is, in many cases, there have been Kickstarters that either had to be scrapped, postponed. I know there are some board game companies out there that did a lot of Kickstarter raises that just folded once these tariffs went into play because it wasn't feasible for them to continue. So it's like the board game Kickstarter environment is the absolute worst space you could possibly be in for something like this to happen. And it's like, wow, we thought we were coasting. We thought there was huge interest. What could go wrong? Well, turns out a lot can go wrong, but hopefully this will be a blip and it won't go back there. And anyway, oh, what a wild ride. Yeah. So thanks everybody who pledged to the Kickstarter. We do hope that we will be able to deliver you your board games on the timeline that was laid out, and barring any future things, hopefully it'll happen. Right on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.